Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Today we will continue our discussion on social classes from where we left off last time. But before we go into the depth of this session, we will try and recapitulate a few points that we made so that we have a same base on which to start from to go into the next phase of measuring as well as trying to understand the concept of social mobility. In the last class, what we were doing was we had suggested that social structures which are determined by the marketers or researchers depends on the need of the researcher, and therefore we can see that there are class systems which may range from 2-class system where it is upper and lower, or 9-class system which may spread over a number of tiers, which would mean maybe upper middle, lower middle, then middle, and so on and so forth. So there is a number of tiers, and like we said, this all depends on the amount of information or amount of differentiation that you want to create in understanding the marketing or the market structure or the target market structure, so that you can carry out the proper segmentation. Marketers, we had already suggested, require this because they have a profile in their mind and they have a profile of their target customer, and by looking at the census information, or in Pakistan, for example, we have the Economic Survey of Pakistan or the Statistical Division yearbooks, where we can find a lot of information regarding these segmentations. So I'm repeating again, so if you want to look at the social class frameworks that have been recorded, we can look at them with these 3 variables. For example, we can look at it from the point of view of education, income, and occupation. This data is in Pakistan available in the Statistical Yearbook, and you can find this published by the Statistical Division of the Pakistan government, and also included in the Pakistan Economic Survey document. So though we are looking at through the books that we have, we are looking at the Western world, but we also find similar data and information, and that could be a very appropriate approach to look at what Pakistanis have been able to develop in this area. And if the marketer has his own profile in terms of the kind of education or occupation that the target market has, they can immediately find this logic of occupation or income or the professional age groups, the amount of education they have had, the occupation that they have in. This all gives them a clear-cut picture so that these 2 factors can be combined, and then the target market can be very clearly established. However, the problem is, and this is what I've been trying to explain, there is no clearly identified and confirmed method to measure these class systems. And when we look at a few tools that we have, as we had done, and we will revise them and see where these issues come along, we find that they can be done through subjective measures. Then there is this the objective measure, and then we also have a reputational measure, which is normally used by a social scientist and not very practicable for the business researcher, because business researcher is more concerned in establishing a niche or a target rather than trying to understand the social structure, which is the underlying frame which is normally required for sociological studies. Now, if we look at the objective research, we find that the 3 most important tools that I've just mentioned are the variables that we normally use is the income, education, and occupation. These 3 are the normally recognized frameworks. Out of this, we understand that the occupation is the most important, because normally people tend to view not income as the factor, but the occupation. Just an example to make you understand this very clearly. Some of the crane operators in Pakistan most probably will be earning more than an assistant manager or a deputy manager in a bank. Now, income of a crane operator may be higher, but as a status goes, the bank manager would be given a higher status. And we said that status is something which determines the power or the reputation or the image of the people in a particular class. And that is why we try and focus more on occupation and education as two very valid measures. Income is definitely used, but income is normally used not for the purposes of what I'm saying is purposes of actually determining the social class, but it helps us understand consumption behavior. If you have higher income, logically, you will be trying to buy certain products which may not be required by your social class, but the tendency would be there to buy a particular kind of consumption patterns you will have. And the marketers need to look at those consumption patterns from the point of view of high image, conspicuous purchase behaviors. We've already discussed that at a point of time. Today, what we are going to be doing is to see how this social frame moves within the system. What the logic is that there is a mobility framework which runs through the system. That means some social class people can move from the lower to the higher. Now, basically, the logic is always there that there will be a movement from the lower end to a higher scale of social circles. This is very typical of the Western world, where there is total freedom of enterprise, and we normally tend to push ourselves with the goal of achieving higher levels. This is true to Pakistan also, that is what the goal normally is. But unfortunately, categorical shift of social class is difficult because of certain constraining features. Our culture is one constraining feature which tends to restrict movement from the lower level to the higher level. Second issue that we find is that there is always a movement which goes backward. That means if we look at the people who were the what you call as before 1960 or 65, the people who were born before that period, and the people who were born after that, we have seen, according to research carried out in the Western world, and which also conforms to our own life cycles, that people's status which was there in 1965 and those people, the parents there and their children now, there is a slight movement backward, which means that the children who were born between 65 and over, let's say, about 1980, they have not been able to achieve that standard of life that used to belong to their parents. So there is a definite shift which goes from the higher level to the lower level. And we need to remember constantly that because of these shifts taking place regarding incomes, regarding occupations, we will find that we need to be very careful in trying to make this issue. As we are looking at the issues of movement from the lower level to the higher level, which will come in a little bit more detail, we should also look at some other variables which tend to help verify the initial points that we had brought in, that is the income, occupation, and education frame. And these variables which have been used by researchers are basically important in terms of verifying these statuses. We had talked about subjective measure in which we asked the people to answer a question as which social class do you think you belong to, and we had suggested there at that point of time in the last session that people normally tend to assume that they are middle class. Therefore, we find most of the people or rather a bias towards the middle class ownership. But to verify this, the researchers tend to look at certain other variables, and one of the variables is the possessions that people have, which is basically the movable property. And it has been recorded and registered in research that people who are from the upper class and from the middle class, they differ, particularly in the way they place their furniture in the living room or in the family room. And it is also true when they position their television sets, whether they would put it in the living room or they would put it in the family room, or would they put it in their bedrooms. So it is according to research that has been carried out, normally the upper class people would have their television sets also located in the various bedrooms, whereas in the lower class, it is normally placed in the living room. So these frameworks, like I'm saying, these variables, particularly because when you do the subjective analysis, people tend to suggests that they are more middle class because that's the frame that we have, because we look at our own status on the basis of the products that we believe are bought by middle class people. Maybe they belong to a lower class, or maybe they are a higher class. So there is a confusion in this framework. To verify this issue, there are some other measures they are used, and they are actually help to other criteria. Now, over this single index framework, we also looked at some multiple index, and we said that these multiple index basically create a grouping of all the other variables by giving them particular weights. And this is, like I said in the very beginning, the importance is of these measures or these methods are only related to the need of the marketer. If the marketer wants in-depth analysis of all the three factors to be pulled together, then he has to find the method which best suits his requirements in terms of whether he is going to be developing a product for them, whether he is going to be marketing them through a particular retail outlet, or is he interested in setting the price, or it is about the way the communication will take place, whether it's going to go to the newspapers or a particular magazine read by a particular segment. So all these decisions which are required to be taken actually push the requirements of categorizing the scales. And we have already said that these social class systems are very important in trying to determine segments. And that is why we find that social class is a major form of segmentation that we do. In some areas, a new factor like geodemographics are also incorporated. We need to understand that all the things that we have talked about, for example, education, occupation, and income, they are demographics. So, but some researchers have incorporated geodemographics, which means they also include the place of residence as an indicator of a social class. But we need to be very clear that living in a particular place does not really suggest the class. Why? Because people who might be new rich, as we call nouveau riche, which means people who have become recently rich, may buy houses or locate themselves in areas which are considered to be upper level or upper class residences. But to verify, the researchers have incorporated a few other measures. One measure I've already explained, that is the way the furniture is laid down in the house. The second that is being used is the cleanliness of the system. How clean is your house, or the cleanliness of the environment in which you are staying. That also tries to project the importance. The important thing obviously also is very critical, that higher income always does not translate into higher class status, which we require to understand. And the only thing why we look at higher income is because of the kind of products that may be bought by these people, not because of the social status, but because of the amount. And if you recall, I had suggested that conspicuous consumption, which is the outcome of money, is the responsibility of this issue, and it comes about because of this factor. Whereas the status purchase normally comes from a different angle. Status consumption is basically because you have seen or you assume a particular status in your system because you belong to a particular category of occupation. Maybe you are a bank manager, maybe you are a doctor or a lawyer. So you tend to consume within that frame. These two distinctions must be kept in mind when we start looking at income as a framework. Now, when we are looking at this, let's look at a few profiles, which are, I'm putting it very shortly. The notes will have lengthy discussion on it, but in the short framework, we will present the various profiles of, let's say, the 6 systems that we have. For example, we have upper. According to research, upper people who belong to that status do not consume conspicuously. Means they do not tend to buy products just to show off their income or their wealth, because it is assumed that they are of a higher status. Secondly, it has been researched that these people tend not to go to personal shopping sprees. That means they will not go to the market. They tend not to go to the shops. So either their servants go, or if they are in a Western culture setting, then they will try and shop online. Now the second category is lower upper. Now these lower upper are considered to be the people who we tend to say in our vernacular or in our Urdu language are the nouveau riche, which means nai doltiye. That means the people who have recently acquired a lot of money from some business venture or from working somewhere outside. They've collected the money, they have enough income. Now these people normally tend to very categorically purchase products not because they require them or even they think about requiring them. They do it because they want to show conspicuous consumption. So we understand that. And these are the people normally one can target for higher end products, costly products, or products which are assumed to be the people or of status or an elite kind of product. Third category is the upper middle. Okay, upper middle, which is basically career-oriented people. Career-oriented means that they normally belong to good jobs, and obviously they would like to show and they buy products to reflect their standard or the status that the occupation or their career has. So they are normally conspicuous, but they are not as conspicuous as the upper middle or lower upper, who are totally grounded towards buying products only because they want to show who they are. Whereas this third category people, which is the upper middle people, they are more career oriented and they want to buy to reflect their status. Now the fourth one is the lower middle. So lower middle people normally want their children to be well behaved. They need to have clean environment because they are lower middle and they want to depict a particular middle class level. Now the fifth group is the upper lower. Now upper lower people normally are interested in striving for security. And in that sense of security, they want to only purchase those things which will give them a comfortable life. And the rest of the time, they would like to invest in areas which will give them protection into the future. So upper lower people always are spending to protect themselves from the future. And then finally, we have the people who we call the lower. Now, these people are normally people who are out of work, they are poorly educated, and they have children who are also very poorly treated. And if you see on the screen that we have given this note, you will find that most of the time we can relate categories of Pakistan into these frameworks, and we can place various families into this system. Now, having talked about this, we need to also understand that over these 6 categories or 7 categories, people can move from the lower to lower middle and then upper, lower upper, whatever. They can move up and down. Most of the time, the assumption is that they will be moving up. But like I said, between 2 groups of people before 1965, people born who are normally known as the baby boomers, and Generation X, which came after 65, normally lasting up to 1980. Obviously, these categories are different for various countries. We find that there has been a slip below from the people who are from the Generation X. They have gone actually below the status that their parents have. And the reason basically is because of the environmental factors all around this place. We understand and we know that during the 1970s, the petrol prices shot up rapidly. And the discretionary income that was available was restricted. When it became restricted, obviously, the purchasing capacity and the lifestyle was affected, and people tended to reduce their living standards just to be able to meet the sudden surge in prices and inflation and so on and so forth. Therefore, when we discuss social classes, we need to be able to recognize that, number one, they can be different in different countries. So upper normally would tend to behave in the same way as upper in a Western world. But we should also realize that this only this behavior is not the only point, but the way they live, the way their style is, all reflect a particular behavior pattern. We also try and understand, number one, between the countries. Number two, we need to understand that there is time frames in which these changes may take place. We may be able to, because there is no hard and fast, research that has existed from the very first time to this period of time, and we have categorized certain people in one category and we have another category today, so we can compare. But what we can see is the demographics in terms of education, in terms of income, and in terms of occupation may have shifted. People might have got better jobs now in terms of their signatures or the kind of designations that they have, but that does not mean that they still reflect the quality of life that people had at a point of time. So these things can also vary very rapidly, and we need to be very careful in doing this kind of a thing. Not only this, we remember that when we do take into consideration various countries, we should look at how these social mobility can take place within countries. We know India, and as we know that there is a caste system there, it is very difficult for people to move, and therefore there is major restrictions in India on social mobility. However, in the Western world, specifically like America as an example, there is more tendency of this movement. Pakistan having a different cultural setting, we might consider it a little differently in terms of mobility. Though there is no restriction in Pakistan on enterprise, which means there is no restriction put by the national culture, but subcultures within the country might affect our social mobility area. For example, in the areas what we call the Wadera mindset, which means the landlord system, which has been very prevalent in certain areas of Pakistan, restricts movement. And the other major area of restriction that is placed on the movement is the level of education. It is very categorical again that this movement, when we are talking about, is definitely facilitated by the level of education that people have. And I've already suggested in the earlier stages, particularly when we look at the condition in Pakistan specifically, when some marriage has to take place, so the families normally tend to, number one, ask कि बेटा क्या करता है और या उसकी तालीम कितनी है. These are the two important considerations for the families to look at in terms of how they will reflect the cultural or the social class that they are interested in. Keeping these things in mind, we need to be able to clearly understand that the social class variations do take place, and they have a different kind of connotations in different countries and based on certain regional conceptualizations. Now, having said this, let's look at the practical application of the social class. Now, one of the applications of social class is that people tend to behave, and we have said that consumption behavior is reflected of the social class. So any social class can use these three methods of trying to acquire certain behaviors. Number one is that we tend to understand who we are, and therefore we tend to know that our social class is this, and therefore we act according to that social class. The second category is when we try and look at a particular higher class people, and therefore we try and copy that class, which means we target a ideal level. The third category is that we do not know who we are, but because we are in a particular environment, therefore we look at the neighbor and we tend to do what our neighbor does. So basically, this is the method, three particular behaviors that consumers tend to show and reflect based on their social class frameworks. Now, a few examples in the area of clothing and fashion, for example, as well as in terms of leisure and traveling. Now, in clothing, there has been research which is done considerably in the Western world, and maybe somebody might like to do it in Pakistan also, that lower middle class people, when they wear t-shirts, normally they would wear t-shirts with logos which reflect a group, an idea, or a theme. It's part of it. Like maybe group called, band called something, the logo would be used, and this is normally done by the lower middle class. But the upper class people would wear t-shirts which will not be so highly presenting a particular logo. It will be more subtle, and obviously they will try and avoid completely demonstrating their own personality out of the class that they have. So they will tend to avoid that. So we can see people who have a very strong logo which is reflective of their class system. Similarly, in case of the leisure time, for example, I mean, just a basic example, the kind of people who go to the zoo and the kind of people who would visit the museum, logic says that these two places would attract different class of social sectors. And if marketers have to promote their products within these groupings, then we can see that these things can be done without a problem. And marketers, when they understand how consumers normally, where they go, what they do, what they buy, they can then make sure that their targeted communications reflect these things. Now, saving is another important area. And what I've already told you, at the lower middle class level, people normally tend to save more. Why? Because it is their security issue. But upper class level, these people tend to create more wealth for themselves. And the wealth creation, I've already explained, is very important in terms of the suggestion of the future. So wealth is what targets the future income that people have. Therefore, if the marketers know where wealth exists, they should be able to project the kind of money that will be spent by that particular group. This brings us to the end of the social class framework. And during this social class, I had been suggesting or mentioning certain things. For example, the cultural frame. Culture obviously is the broader condition that exists where social classes exist within the culture. So the point is that yes, where the social classes do exist, but they are also there is an over umbrella which is developed by the cultural frame of the area. And culture is something which is enduring. We need to also understand that cultures may cross boundaries. So we might be able to suggest that Pakistan has a particular culture, but then we also suggest that Balochistan has a culture, and that is not confined to the Pakistani territory alone. It can cross over to the Iranian territory. The Punjabi culture, for example. Punjabi culture is again transferable or can go across the border to the Indian side. Same is the case with the Bengali culture. Now, for example, the West Bengal belongs to India and the East Bengal is what we call now Bangladesh. The cultures cross over. And therefore, basically, when I'm introducing this aspect of culture, the idea was to confirm that culture is the behavior of the social behavior of the whole society, where social class fits in within this overall framework. And that is why I've been repeatedly telling you that culture, the way the social class behaves across the borders, for example, could be affected by the culture. Like I said, there could be a particular upper class people in Punjab, and then upper class people in Bengal. And because of the cultural frames, they may be different in their behavior. So we need to recognize that. And that is why we call it also the character of the society. These factors may include, for example, the language that we have, the knowledge, law, food, clothing, and so on and so forth. Now, just to put this perspective to you, I had this occasion of being in Japan, and I was meeting one of my clients in Japan while I was doing business. And while we were discussing on dinner, my question was that I've been to China. Why is it that the Chinese always serve green tea before the dinner starts, whereas the Japanese will always serve a glass of water, which is typical what happens in Pakistan also. So what was the reason for that? So he told me that it is basically cultural frames, and we have to understand what is culture and what is the value. So we will be discussing this. Now the point was, he said it is traditional. The reason for his approach on this tradition, as by his statement, he said that China, the rivers are the only source for water, and normally the rivers do not have clean water. So they are forced to boil the water. When they were boiling the water, obviously you can't drink the boiled water hot. So they added tea to it, and that became one of their major considerations. Whereas in Japan, the water flows through springs and the water is clean, so they can drink directly from the spring. So that was the cultural frame. With this, I also asked him, and it's a very interesting thing, and you, like we said, that certain factors reflect a culture, which may include clothes and the food and the music and fashion and so forth. So I asked him, just on my curiosity, how would he define the Japanese culture? So he said, and I still remember distinctly, this is something in 1986, 87, he said, Japanese culture can be defined by miniaturization, similarity, and beauty. Now, this is a very strange frame how he came to this, but he was reflecting their work environment, their behaviors, and the methods. If you look at any documentary where you see the Japanese homes or the furniture that they have in the home, this is normally the same. All homes most probably have the same. They sit on the floor, they have wooden houses, they have more or less everything the same thing. And all of this is miniaturized. That means they're all small in the sense Japan is not a very big country. So they tend to use space very effectively, and they have been able to achieve a very high standard in making things small, which includes plants. So bonsai plants are normally big trees, but made into very small systems, which we might call bonas. So they have been able to develop that. But we cannot ignore the beauty that has been created within the system. So if you look at it, they were very clear on, and he was very clear on how to define culture. Now, what I'm saying to you is that it doesn't mean that he is right. It just means that people tend to define culture in various ways, but there is no confirmed method by which one can say, what is the Pakistani culture? And it's the same situation with, let's say, America. When I asked him, okay, since you have been to America, how would you define the American culture? So his statements were very specific. He said, McDonald's, jeans, and joggers, Nike, which means all about food and the way the clothings are. So he was defining a culture of America through these frames, whereas he was defining the Japanese culture through intangibles. And this is what is very fantastic about this whole thing. And we will try and look at it, that these are very significant things, but nobody has been very clear in being able to define what is culture or how to define culture. But we all believe that cultures have a direct impact on consumer behavior. And this impact comes from the culture through the social class system into the families. It works. It has to be there. It also is reflective of the work culture. So we do not only talk about culture or the behavior of a society, we can also talk about certain aspects of the society. For example, the work culture, the professional culture that we have, the work ethics that we call, they all come out of the cultural system. Now, since we are talking about culture, we need to be able to define it. So the definition that we have given is this: it is the sum total of learned beliefs, values, and customs that serve to direct consumer behavior of members of a particular society. Now, if you look at this definition, you're talking about the sum total of beliefs. So the problem is that we need to understand what are beliefs. Second, we need to understand what are values. Third, we need to understand what are the customs. Because like I just gave you the idea that the Chinese offer green tea, hot green tea before lunch, dinner, whatever. And the Japanese offer, or a Pakistani would offer, a glass of water. These are customs. These are not values and these are not beliefs. But on the other side, we need to be able to distinguish certain frameworks where we can say what is the distinctive feature between a belief and the value, for a very simple reason that if the marketers confuse these issues, then we will never be able to mold consumer behavior as we wish, because values are more difficult to change, whereas beliefs can change. And a good example of belief is that some person can come and believe that the South Korean television set is better than the Japanese television set, or vice versa. Now, these beliefs can be changed by establishing certain objective frameworks, and we can convince people at a point of time that the belief was wrong because the facts state that this is what is the truth. On the other hand, value systems are very difficult to bring about a change. And values are the ones which are more enduring, are very strongly reflective of the culture that we are going to be discussing. Now, when we were talking about belief, basically belief is statements, verbal or non-verbal, which we have in the mind. But the values that we have are what we said central to our behaviors. And I gave you an example between a belief. A belief may be, like I said, the Korean television may be better than the Japanese or vice versa. But what we do value is quality. So we may have a value that we say, yes, I value or I will buy only quality. This reflects our value system. But when I say, I believe that the Korean television is better than the Japanese television, or the Japanese television is better than the Korean television, then I am reflecting a belief which is based on my value system. It is in the same way when we talk about the value of, I may think of my values are that animal cruelty is bad. Being cruel to animals is not correct. So therefore, I believe that I should not buy any product which has animal testing in it. And that is why in the Western world, and particularly in Pakistan also, we see products where it is very categorically stated that this product was not, or this chemical, or this, cosmetic was not animal tested. Now, this animal tested is particularly reflective of the value system that I have, and it is therefore now being produced in kind of a belief that I say I don't want to buy. On the other hand, custom is a little different. Custom is the way we do things. Now, again, remember that when we are going to produce, let's say, a documentary in on the television for an advertisement, then we become very particular of making sure that we do not break the customs. A few of the customs that you might recognize in Pakistan could be that in the Punjab area, normally we would tend to customarily have rice before we have chapati. That means if in a dinner framework we set a dinner, then first people will tend to eat the rice, and then most probably they will eat the chapati. But on the other side, if you go to Karachi, people will tend to eat the chapati first and the rice second. There is customary. And obviously, when we have to produce some kind of a communication message, then we need to take care of the customary things which are critical for our purposes. But when we look at the belief system, which I said can be changed, there is a different framework, but values are something we do not want to clash against, because value systems are totally reflective of some things that are widely accepted by the society. Maybe one of the value systems is that we are very good to our guests. And if we are very good to our guests, everything that we do will reflect this particular kind of behavior. Now, as we go along, we should understand that culture, therefore, is the invisible hand which guides consumer behavior. And I would like to read a statement which is very strongly reflective of our discussion on culture. The statement states, consumers both view themselves in the context of their culture and react to their environment based upon the cultural framework that they bring to that experience. And that experience is the experience of purchase and consumption. Further, it says each individual perceives the world around him or her through his own cultural lens, which basically means that whatever we see, if we see it on a television or in an advertisement, we will try and interpret that information based on our culture, my culture, your culture. Now, if the marketer is not aware of the logic of culture, then he will be making a mistake in the framework which we discussed very strongly when we talked about communication, that the goal of the communication is that the message sent by the sender must be received, interpreted, and applied by the receiver. So if the target has different cultural connotations, whereas the sender has used it in a different form, then we will find that there is a gap. There will not be any a link between the two, and we will find that there are reasons for failures. Now, therefore, the invisible hand that we are talking about is related to the things that we think are right to do. Let's take a very simple example. I don't know the value system or belief system behind all this, but if you observe the traffic, the way we travel on the roads or the traffic, if we were in, for example, US or UK or some Western world, the way the traffic runs there and the way the traffic runs in Pakistan reflects a total different understanding of the cultures. And obviously, at the back of the culture is the value system. Now, again, the beliefs and the value systems are what is very reflective. And I'm trying to make sure that you understand that these overriding phenomena have to be understood very categorically. I'll give you an example of my own, and I'll try and show how people see things as they want to see. And they will refuse to see things as you want as marketers to see them. So you need to be very careful. Now, this was a person who had been arrested for murder, and he had 6 or 7 sons who were also arrested. And this was the story that he was relating to me. His belief was that he had not done anything wrong. So when I asked him, why is he in the jail with his sons who are having punishments from 5 years to, let's say, life imprisonment? It's very interesting to hear what he said. He said, Saab, it's not my fault. Meri galti koi nahi. तो मैंने कहा हुआ क्या? What happened? तो he says like this, कि जनाब हमारी दुश्मनी थी और दुश्मनी में हमें पता चला कि हमारे दुश्मन बस में बैठे हुए हैं, तो मैंने उसमें ग्रेड फेंका, लोग मर गए. Now, so I said, obviously लोग मर गए, तो that is why you are punished. He said, no, I did not kill those people because जिनको मैंने मारना था वो तो बस में से जिंदा निकल के भाग गए. Now the point is that he would not understand that he was doing something wrong. And he was believing that he was doing something right and something had gone wrong, and that what has gone wrong is not his responsibility. The responsibility was perhaps somewhere else, which may be that he believed that Allah did it, so he had nothing to do with it. Now, this is where we must try and understand when we bring marketing into position. I also said that culture is internal to a country, which is national culture, but there could also be cultures which are supranational. Now, supranational is when the boundaries cross over. It is very simple to know that people who travel from Pakistan or from Pakistan to Arab world, for jobs and they have transferred and started living there, they create a small cultural frame within themselves. So that is why we find most of the people who have traveled out still reflect major part of cultures which are very enduring, and those enduring values come from, like I said, from the cultural values that we have acquired and we have taken them along with us. These values we learn from, like we have already talked about, from the way children see their parents, and these values then get ingrounded, and that then reflects in the culture. Now, we also talked about the supranational, which means across nations, but then there are group cultures also, and they are more or less what we call the ethnic systems. Now, ethnic groups, and I've already discussed with you the social class, all these reflect particular specific unique frameworks which are typical of that particular society or that particular group or that particular country. So we need to be able to understand how these things go across the world, and that is why we can see at some points the value systems tend to converge. There is also this theory where this discussion is taking place, which suggests that are cultures converging or are cultures diverging, which means are the cultures by some method coming together. And the reason of suggesting that they may be coming together is because of this very high level information flow. Like I was just mentioning to you, people who travel to, let's say, Middle East, those people, those Pakistanis who go there, once they have lived within that system, when they come back, they bring certain values from that system. On the other hand, they also take some values to that place where they have transferred to. When this match takes place, tendency is that the cultures might start converging. And there is a significant information for marketers in this logic, that we can find cultural similarities to exploit when we want to reduce a cost and we want to exploit economies of scale. That means the same ad reflecting the same culture can be used in different countries, which is very typical about what is happening in the advertising field, where the ads which are developed in India showing Indian models are also very well fitted with the Pakistani cultural environment, because that is the way we have. However, it is very difficult to bring in an American model and try and set that model up into a Pakistani cultural setting. So we find that there may be a convergence in certain categories and it may be diverging in certain other areas. Now, culture also tries to help us provide solutions to the way we should act or behave or consume. This is also very specific, though we do not recognize it, but if you look at it carefully, you will be able to see that culture guides us. You know, misal ke taur pe, cultures also suggest khana jo hai, should we eat before saying our prayers or should we eat after saying our prayers? Or what kind of food should we eat? Should we eat breakfast ke upar paratha khana hai, lassi pini hai, or should we go for omelette and cereals? Now, again, we do not think about it, but culture decides or suggests us a solution. It's the same way that we can see cultures deciding whether we should sit on the floor and dastarkhan bichha ke khaya jaye, or we should sit on the table and have it. Now, again, remember, like I said, that there is this divergence and convergence taking place. In the, let's say, the Arab world, if you visited somebody's home, they will put the food on the table, on the table, not on the table, but on the dastarkhan, and all the food would be placed in the center, and people will eat directly from the same plate or the same dish. But in the Western culture, it may be that every plate has to be separated. Now, in Pakistan also, maybe at a point of time, we used to have the same system where we used to eat all together the way the Arabs do. But over a period of time, we have shifted, and now we tend to have our own plates, and our own choice of food that we want to take. Here is, which is very important, because the marketers have to recognize that these changes may be taking place or divergences may be occurring. So at this point, let me wind up for the time being, and I'll take the important part of the cultural frame in the next lecture. We have completed the social, but when we looked at the social class, we do remember that culture is the overriding frameworks, and culture does not only reflect a particular object or a particular area. It can have, let's say, cross-national impacts. People can be moving, and people might be able to bring certain new cultural frames within the country. The third thing that we looked at was very important, and that is, how should we distinguish between what is belief, values, and customs? Custom is something that we regularly do. Values are the ones which are very enduring, and marketers have to be very careful, because values are generally the accepted norms or guidances to behavior, whereas beliefs are non-verbal or verbal statements that reflect our own internal thinking. One can be changed, the other is very difficult to change. Rather, one can be changed, the other would be the ones that we would like to conform to. And in terms of custom, we need to be very careful when we are producing communications that those, customs are taken care of, and we do not cross those cultures, because that will reflect bad behavior. Now, even dress code is the kind of thing that is happening. I know that research is taking place. Previously, we had shalwar kameez, which was very simple, a national dress, but because of certain labels or certain branded products coming into the market, we see a change even taking place within that framework. So concluding today, we have finished the social framework, but we have continued with looking at the broader picture of the culture. And we will continue this lecture in the next class. For the time being, let's say we have done whatever we had to do today. Thank you very much, and Allah Hafiz.